They're rowing their way along the north shore of Lake Erie, arrive quite late at night, and either that night or in the morning he met Tecumseh. Now he knew about Tecumseh, who had been fighting with the Americans for some time, trying to defend his people and their land in the United States. The two of them met, and there's a story that Tecumseh said to his followers, "This is a man."
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stories of 1812 podcast. We're glad that you could join us today. Today, we have a very special guest, whose name is Wesley Turner, or should I say Dr. Wesley Turner. He was an associate professor of history at Brock University from 1967 to 1998 here in St. Catharines in the area. He is a prolific writer. Some of his books include The War of 1812, The War for Canada, British Generals in the War of 1812, and the War of 1812, the war that both sides won. He served on the boards of several historical societies, as well as taking on the role of president of the Ontario Historical Society. And he also wrote a book that we're going to talk about today called The Astonishing General. And we'll get to why it's astonishing, the life and legacy of Sir Isaac Brock. Wes, Dr. Turner, do we say Wes or do we say Dr. Turner?
Oh, Wes is fine.
Wes,
Sure.
welcome,
Yes.
and thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
One of the things that you and I talked about that a lot of people might not be aware of is what I call the lay of the land at the time in the early 1800s.
Mhm.
And I think the viewers of this podcast will see a map eventually as we speak about it. But tell us that, because, the distances were long and people couldn't go everywhere. There weren't roads.
Yes, travel times are unbelievably slow
Yeah.
to modern people. For example, coming from England to Quebec by sailing ship, at the best would take a month, and more often 6 weeks or 2 months. Imagine the time, traveling that time in a leaky wooden sailing ship. And then travel on land in the Canadas, Lower Canada, which is now Quebec, Upper Canada, which is now Ontario. Travel on land was almost impossible at times of the years because there are very few roads. The roads weren't paved. For example, you'd be lucky to travel from Montreal to Kingston in 5 days. Now imagine, today you can drive it in half a day.
Indeed.
Right? And from Kingston to York, 4 days at the best
Yeah.
by land.
Yeah.
And it wasn't much faster by water.
And the other thing is, it did not have the number of people that we have today, right? What,
Yes.
50,000 maybe along the
Well, roughly
Yeah.
77,000
okay.
in Upper Canada
Yeah.
is the usual estimate.
And they were along the St. Lawrence River, along the edges of the lakes.
That's right. Yes. Very few
Basically.
inland.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when we talk about the story of Brock, we've got to take that into account, because he just couldn't zip over, although he did take the boat, I think, from Niagara-on-the-Lake to York at the time. But otherwise, it was, a considerable journey. So we have to take that into account.
Oh, yes.
So our dear friend Isaac Brock,
Mhm.
he was born in Guernsey,
Yeah.
right? Tell us a little bit about his early life.
One of the Channel Islands.
Yeah.
So it's closer to France than to England. His father was John Brock, who retired from the Navy and died fairly young. Brock was born in 1769. His father died, I think, in 1777. And his mother, Elizabeth, was the daughter of a very prominent family, her father was the chief magistrate of Guernsey.
So well rooted there, eh?
Very well rooted, very part of the elite of Guernsey.
And that family had a history of military service, didn't they?
Yes, it
Yeah,
did. Yes.
yeah.
Four of Brock's brothers
Mhm.
also served in the army, and another one was in the militia at Guernsey, later became the chief magistrate of
Right,
Guernsey. So they're a prominent family, but they're not a very wealthy family. They do
right,
have money,
right.
but they're
Well,
not,
we'll come back to that because
right?
you had to purchase commissions in the army in those days. So
Yes,
we'll come
right.
back to that. Now, he went to boarding school at age of 10, and then
Hmm.
he studied in Rotterdam under a French pastor, I think when he was, what, 14 or so.
Yes,
But that gave him capability in French,
yes,
which I'm sure came in handy.
yes. Oh,
Yeah,
yes. He
yeah,
served a long time in Lower Canada
yeah,
among the
yeah.
French-speaking population.
And then, and we're going rather fast. I think you
Yes.
deal with it in more detail in your book,
Oh, yes.
but but we're going fast because we want to get to the battles, right? He joined the army at age 15, was it?
Yes, that's right.
And they purchased
Bought a
a
commission.
commission,
Yes,
which an ensign's commission.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
The lowest office, the lowest rank, not really
right,
an officer,
right.
but
But he didn't stay there.
mhm.
He founded his own company, which turned into the 49th, wasn't it? The 49th, or
No, well, it
no?
was added to the
It
49th
was added.
Regiment.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah,
that's the main regiment that he was involved with,
right.
called the 49th Regiment of Foot, which
Foot.
means it's infantry.
Okay, and then that takes us up to, I guess, 1790,
Mhm.
1791. And then eventually he purchased shares. It was an ownership thing, right? And he ended up being the commander of the 49th, but he also had ownership in it,
Well, you owned your commission,
right?
and when you left the army, you could sell your commission,
I see.
and that in effect was the pension
Right,
for
right.
retired officers.
And then I think we just are tracking with him
Hmm.
for people who are following along. Um, he then purchased another rank, which was quite expensive in those days, a lieutenant colonel, I
That's
think,
right.
and that was around 3,000 pounds at the time.
3,000.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
his debts altogether amounted to 3,000. It
right,
may have been for several ranks, but
right.
that's right. That's the highest rank to purchase.
Right. And
Uh,
so uh, he's now almost ready
mhm,
to go to war, although that maybe not the right way to put it. But in 1799, he saw
mhm.
action at the Battle of Egmont op Zee. I'm saying it in the Dutch way.
Sure.
Right. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was an expedition against France.
Right.
French troops were occupying Holland at the time, and so the British sent a small force there, and including Brock's regiment, and he reports that he led a charge across the sand dunes against the French,
Mm.
got a slight wound, but it showed his style of military, of leadership in combat. He was going to be at the front of his troops and leading them rather than standing behind giving orders.
And that forebode what, or predicted, if you like, what he would do in Upper Canada, didn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, in a
that
way.
would be his style when he comes to Canada.
Yeah.
And it was a style that was quite often practiced in the British Army at that time,
Mhm.
at other theaters.
Then, and we're going rather quickly, so apologize
Sure.
to those people who are really trying to follow Brock in detail. And then he was part of a naval expedition to Copenhagen in 1801, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
He was on the ship beside the
the
flagship.
ship.
The intention was that his regiment would land to fight the Danes, but it wasn't needed. Uh, Nevertheless, they came under fire, and he saw Nelson's challenge to the Danes, which caused them to surrender. And the boldness of Nelson, I think, impressed him too, and that was something he carried on again
Which
in
we will
Canada.
see him kind of do in a way, right, at
Yes,
Detroit.
yes,
Okay, so now we're up to 1802. That was rather quick. but we got there. And then his regiment, 49th Regiment, was assigned to Upper Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was sent to Canada. It spent.
Sorry, Lower Canada.
That's right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
landed at Quebec in
Yeah.
1802, in the
Yeah.
summer of 1802,
Yeah.
and stayed there. And they would move parts of a regiment to various places. So the
Mm.
49th might be in Lower Canada and some of it in Upper Canada. But Brock spent considerable time in Lower Canada.
He did at that time. He did make a voyage to Fort George or something. Like there was a mutiny or there was a revolt that he was asked to deal with, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
And he crossed the lake from York,
Mm.
which is Toronto, to Fort George to deal with that, and arrested or had the mutineers arrested and sent to for a trial to Lower Canada,
Mm-hmm.
where they were tried. Some of them were shot, which was the usual penalty for mutiny and
Mm.
desertion. Uh, and then when the news arrived at Fort George, he read out the
Yes.
sentence to his regiment,
And
and
yeah.
I'm sure there were tears in his eyes
Yeah.
because he deplored uh, the why men had done that,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I think he made it clear that he cared for his regiment and he
Yes.
was saddened by it.
Yeah.
There was no pleasure in that or satisfaction.
Yeah.
I think
It,
the men would understand that.
yeah. Interesting reaction for
Yes.
a commanding officer, and he was different than others. We'll look
Can I
at.
can I
Yeah.
tell you another story at this point?
Please.
In 18 from 1806 to 1807,
Hmm.
he was in Quebec as the commander of the forces, commander
Yeah.
of all the troops.
Yeah.
And there was a building called Jesuit Barracks,
Hmm.
which the government owned, and there were troops garrisoned in there in the barracks. And Brock went to the local authority, who was Thomas Dunn, and said, "I'd like to have the property that's adjacent to the barracks uh, create put a hard surface there so the men can come out and exercise and have recreation. Otherwise, they're spending their times in the taverns,
Taverns.
getting
Yeah.
into trouble."
Yeah.
So Dunn said, "Okay, we can do that." But then the next spring, he said, "No, you can't do that
Mhm.
because I've got people who want to build houses in there." And so Brock figures there's some kind of deal going on here. Nevertheless, he said, "Okay, I won't intrude, I won't trespass or anything." Now, the interesting thing is that in 1811, the Governor General, Prevost,
Mhm.
said he wanted the same thing. He wanted that land for recreation of the troops.
Mhm.
And he was running up against resistance from the local authorities who wanted to develop it. You've got developers in those days. So he wrote to the British government, and the British government said, "Yes, you can do that.
Mhm.
You can provide that for the troops for their recreation."
Right.
So Brock had a case, I think,
Well,
back then.
that wasn't the only story about him and how,
Hmm.
he really cared about his men. And
Yeah.
we'll get back to that. And remind me when we're talking about the voyage to Detroit, what he did then. We'll
Oh, yes.
we'll get there. Okay. Um, we're 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 kind of moving along. He did take a break and went back to England
Yes.
from 1805 to 1806, and I gather that was common, I guess, for officers who were
Oh, yes.
stationed overseas, and that I guess gathered allowed him to, you know, rebuild his network. I think there's a story. He was well connected at the Horse Guards, and
Hmm.
with the Duke of York, and he proposed a veterans battalion.
Oh,
I think
that's
at
right.
that time.
That's right.
So
Yes.
yeah,
Uh, Big problem was desertion
yeah.
from garrisons close
Yeah.
to the American border. In fact, there was desertion from both sides. And so he proposed that soldiers who had served their term, well, whatever it was, 20 years, 25 years in the army, um, should be recruited as a veterans battalion, and they would guard the border. They
Mhm.
would be stationed along the border, and they would be reliable. They would have no reason to want to
Mhm.
desert. They would be loyal and dependable, and of course, experienced. They'd be good border guards, in effect.
So he comes back to Canada, and he's
Mhm.
predominantly between Montreal and Quebec City. He has a new
Yes,
Governor General, James Craig.
yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because next will be his move to Niagara.
Well, the governors were not supposed to get involved in political disputes
Mm,
and the like, in elections and so on. Craig, however, uh, uh, really had his doubts about the loyalty of the French-speaking population,
mm,
and so he didn't trust them. He said, and he made it very clear he didn't trust them, and so he interfered in elections, trying to prevent certain members from being elected, like the editor of the French Canadian newspaper Le Canadien, uh, and so this caused a lot of problems. In fact, he jailed some of them really illegally. And Brock saw this, and he was, I think, a bit upset about it, though he had to support his commanding officer, of course. But I think Brock learned from that when he was in Upper Canada as uh, the administrator of the province. He didn't interfere in elections. He let the people. He didn't distrust them.
mm,
He tried to show he trusted them. He thought they would be loyal and reliable. And I think
mhm.
he learned that from Craig's unfortunate experience.
Well, that's a good point. We'll see that later, how he's well connected with people,
Yes, yeah, that's
different than
true.
other military leaders. Okay, so he's now, I think, up in
Mhm,
Montreal to. There's a bit of a back and forth, and he's in Montreal in 1811. But then
mhm,
comes the big change,
mhm.
because in 1811 we have a new Governor General, Francis Gore. Sorry, uh,
Sir George
Sir
Prevost.
George Prevost, and he appoints him
Mhm,
administrator
mhm.
of Upper Canada and chief commander.
That's right. Yes,
And so he moves to Upper Canada.
yes. And he he had been sent to Upper Canada earlier
Yeah,
from Quebec, and he said, "Oh, there I'm going into the wilderness where there's nothing. I'll miss my garden in Quebec. I'll
yeah,
miss
yeah,
my,
yeah.
the society of Quebec City." So he's sent as the president, what's called president of the council,
Mhm.
meaning the executive council of Upper Canada. So it's like the lieutenant governor and the premier are now in Ontario, but he was also commander of the armed forces
Right,
of,
which gave him
yeah,
another responsibility,
yes,
right?
right,
Because things in the United States were getting, I don't know what the right word is, but hot or tense.
yes, very
Uh,
tense.
and and indeed, around that time, we see continuing issues between Britain and the United States. The British searched American ships for deserters. We had impressment of American sailors. We had a naval blockade of the French because the British were
Mhm.
at war with the French. And then, of course, there were the suspicions of the British because, they were in union more or less with some of the indigenous tribes
Yes.
fighting the Americans. So he, all of these things were on the horizon. And I just want to use a quote which is gold for Canadian historians just
Mhm.
to set the stage. And that is Thomas Jefferson, who, in a
Mhm.
letter, right, they're about to declare war. I believe this is just before they declared war or around
Yes.
that time.
Yes.
And he said, seconded by the native energy of our citizens, will soon, I hope, to our force add the benefits of skill, the acquisition of Canada this year, as as far as the neighborhood of Quebec will be a mere matter of marching.
Yes. Yes. And he was not the only one who talked like that.
Yeah,
And Jefferson, of course, was an ex-president,
yeah,
very prominent politician.
yeah.
So to say a thing like that, somebody at that level, uh, could be taken as a definite threat.
Mhm.
And throughout all this period, we have to realize that Britain and Napoleonic France were in a major war in Europe. It was a tremendous effort. Uh, the entire British Navy was involved. It was a very large navy, blockading France. The British were supporting troops in their army under Wellington and Peninsula, and supporting their other allies, Prussia and so on. So this was a world war going on, and off on the side, so to speak, the United States is threatening war with Britain, uh, which the British tried to avoid,
Right.
but it went ahead anyway in June of 1812.
Right. And just before that, though, Brock did a lot because
Mm-hmm.
he's there a year before, roughly,
Yes,
to prepare Upper Canada. Now, he didn't have
yes,
that many troops. He had militia, right?
yes.
And he tried to build alliances with the natives. And he's trying to get Upper Canada ready for war. The problem is he's
Mm-hmm.
got a vast territory, as
Mm-hmm.
we referred to earlier in that map, to try and protect.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, very large and small population, as I mentioned before. The
Mhm,
population of New York State, for example, was over 900,000.
mhm.
So there are far more people in New York State alone compared to both Upper and Lower Canada. And the great fear for Brock and other leaders, as well as many in the population, was they simply couldn't defend themselves against the overwhelming American numbers.
Right,
Uh,
right.
the militia law was that all males, I
Mhm.
think it was 16 to
60?
not
No?
60, maybe 30,
Okay.
lower age, were liable, if called up, to come out for the militia. And they were to meet once a year for training. Well, that, of course, was not nearly enough. Everybody knew that. And so Brock was able to persuade the legislature, the elected legislature, to pass an act in February of 1812 that created what were called flank companies.
Mhm.
Now, these would be men who would volunteer from a militia regiment to join a flank company. It would have those men would have much more training, and they would be expected to be ready instantly to come out for service and probably get involved in fighting. Now, these are farmers, merchants, mechanics, workers. They're not
Mhm.
soldiers. They're not trained. And it would mean leaving their homes, their families, their children, their wives, to take on a pretty dangerous activity for sure. Um, and so in some of the regiments, almost all the men volunteered to join the flank companies. In others, very few did. And there are various reasons for that.
Mhm.
But Brock was so impressed by this, and these flank companies, and later the name is changed to embodied militia,
Mhm.
um, proved themselves very effective in fighting in battles, but also in other tasks such as guarding prisoners
Mhm.
or guarding places and simply providing support for the regular army.
Mhm. So war was declared
Yes.
June 18th, 1812.
Mhm.
Brock heard about it rather quickly, didn't he? He had his
Yes.
network. There was some kind of an express network from New York, and it may have to do with the fur
The
traders.
fur
But anyway,
traders. That's
I
right.
think he heard about it
Yep.
before Prevost did. And, everybody on their guard. Uh, he, you know, he he what he did his best to make sure that preparations were in order.
Yeah.
Um, he had his challenges because it wasn't only the paucity of men and militia
Mhm.
vis-a-vis the those on the other side, but he had forces working against him within the colonial administration. Now, some people would say that, so it would be interesting on your view. And that is Prevost, who his
Mhm.
boss, the governor general, who urged caution, right? He didn't want to
Yeah.
get embroiled in a fight. And
Yeah.
we'll get back to that in a moment. But
Okay.
his view was don't start a fight. And because the population is divided, you may cause the population in the U.S. to rally around
Mhm.
the cause.
Mhm. Well, he had his orders, Prevost did,
Yeah.
from the British government, not to provoke uh, the Americans and try to keep things calm. Um, but Prevost was sending reinforcements to Brock. At the same time, he knew Brock was a rather impetuous kind of officer, and
Believed in first strikes.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
um, and but also Prevost was well aware of the weaknesses of the forces in Upper Canada and the
Hmm.
fortifications.
Hmm.
There really wasn't a very strong fort anywhere along the border,
Yeah.
uh, and his he was cautious, yes. Um, so he thought Brock needed to be restrained, um, and uh, we can't be too hard on Prevost because those were
It
his
is a difference of
orders.
opinion, I think,
Yes,
among
you're right.
historians,
Yeah, there is
right?
a difference for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And the traditional British strategy in defending the Canadas
Hmm.
was to concentrate, if necessary, concentrate their troops at Quebec.
Right.
Now, this had happened if you want to go back to 1775
Five.
when the Americans invaded,
Benedict Arnold,
captured
right?
Montreal, but
Yeah.
couldn't capture Quebec City.
Yeah.
And so the British were able to
Yeah.
uh, recapture it
Yeah.
and recover Canada from the Americans.
Maybe another quote that I found, because his correspondence is rich,
Yes.
and correspondence with his brothers and his family, but also with Prevost, and in
Mhm.
particular Baines, who was his aide de camp, I believe his assistant.
Yes.
Yeah. And if I've got this correctly, and I'm only extracting part of it to illustrate, the population, believe me, is
Mm.
essentially bad. A full belief possesses them that this province must inevitably succumb. What a change an additional regiment would make in this part of the
Mhm.
province. Most of the people have lost all confidence. However, speak loud and look big.
Yes.
So he doesn't lose personal confidence on the eve of the conflict, but you know,
Yes. And he was a large man,
yeah,
tall
yeah,
and broad shouldered,
yeah.
very imposing in person,
Mm.
and he knew well really how to impress.
Mm.
Uh, he knew that by speaking boldly and acting decisively, he would impress people.
Right.
But you have to realize the majority of the population of Upper Canada were recent American immigrants,
Mm.
and they were no
Which he
different.
worried about too.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Every governor of Upper Canada had that worry. So
Mm.
Brock's not unique in worrying about it.
Now, we go quickly to the Battle of Detroit. We're kind of skipping over some time.
Yeah.
And at Detroit, the American commander, Hull,
Mhm.
he had invaded Canada, and then
Mhm.
he went back across the border, and Brock decided to do something about it because, Hull had invaded, so he could say to Provost, right,
Yes.
I've got to defend Canada. So he gathers men and he takes rowboats.
Yes.
Uh, there's an anecdote there. We may skip over it just for 1 second. And he gets to Fort Amherstburg and he meets
Mhm.
the Indian leader, Tecumseh,
Yes.
and together they go over to the other side and launch an attack.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Well, Brock called for volunteers from the militia to come with him to
right.
Detroit. And he's so many volunteered. He said, "I can't take you all. We don't have
Mm,
enough boats,"
mm,
which shows, I think, a change in attitude
mhm.
uh, of the population.
Population,
They
yeah,
had great faith in Brock.
yeah.
So you're right. They take this. They're rowing their way along the north shore of Lake Erie. Arrive quite late at night, and either that night or in the morning he met Tecumseh. Now he knew about Tecumseh, who had been fighting with the Americans for some time, trying to defend his people and their land in the United States. The two of them met, and there's a story that Tecumseh said to his followers, "This is a man." Now you can phrase that in different ways,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
There, there may not have been the exact words of
Mm.
Tecumseh, but I'm sure there was something very similar. I think they impressed each other
Yeah, yeah.
because immediately Brock began to plan with
Mm.
Tecumseh and other indigenous chiefs
Mhm.
what they were going to do with Hull,
Yeah,
and they worked together splendidly. Just he treated him as an ally
yeah,
and a friend, almost as a friend too. I think.
yeah. Now, not for all you battle lovers, we're going to have to skip over some detail. But needless to say, they go over to the other side,
Yes.
and they do so in in different processions, and they ride up to the fort, and again, Brock is fully exposed.
Yes.
Hull initially says, so Brock sends a letter saying, I can't account for what the Indigenous are going to do once the battle begins.
Mhm.
He had already read Hull's mail, so to speak,
Yes.
and knew that he was demoralized. And what happened?
Well, Brock, as you say, knew he was demoralized.
Yeah,
He knew that some of Hull's officers were plotting against him.
yeah.
There was great discontent among the various militia forces, who were. There was a lot of bad feeling between various American militia regiments
Mm.
and Hull's regular troops. Um, and uh, so Brock, as you say, led his forces, and um, he could see that Hull was now. There had also been a bombardment
Yes.
from the British side on the Fort Detroit, and American officers or the reports that Hull was frightened. He was sitting in the corner.
Mhm.
Um, he may have indulged too much in alcohol. Something was wrong with him,
Mhm.
and as soon as the British forces, now also the indigenous forces under Tecumseh, were running around, encircling the fort, and it looked like they had tremendous numbers,
Mhm.
far more than they actually had. So Hull said, "We'll put up a white flag."
Mm.
And without consulting his officers, we're
Mhm.
going to surrender.
Which
Uh,
displeased a lot of his
oh,
officers.
very
Yeah,
much so.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yes, he would be tried later for his treason in effect.
Brock
Yes,
said in a letter that he wrote on the way back to Niagara,
yes.
I think it was a letter to his brothers, confidence
Hmm.
in the general was gone.
Mhm.
Evident despondency prevailed throughout. I have succeeded beyond all expectation.
Yeah.
I crossed the river. We didn't talk about this, but contrary to the opinions of Colonel Proctor, St. George, etc., his own officers,
Mhm.
and what injustice to my own discernment, I must say, proceeded from a cool calculation of the who's and contras.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because he showed there, and he would show later along the Niagara River,
Mhm.
that he could almost anticipate what his opponents would
Yes.
do,
Yes.
depending on his
Yeah.
actions.
Yeah.
Uh, Prevost, for example, thought that he negotiated a truce. Um, he sent his
Which Brock found out on the way back to
Brock found
Niagara.
out
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Prevost thought
Yeah.
the Americans would end the war.
Yeah.
Uh, Brock said no.
No.
Uh,
Yeah.
he didn't expect. Uh, Prevost thought by attacking the United States that would unite the Americans around the War of 1812 because there was great disunity in the United
Mhm.
States. Brock knew that. Brock was certain that would not happen, and
And
he was correct in that belief.
there was another
Yes.
battle to come,
Yes.
which was our dear friend's last battle. So there was much in between, but on October 13th, 1812,
Yes.
the Americans launched an attack from Lewiston and
Uh-huh.
crossed in boats, and there was a lot of cannon fire.
Oh, yes.
And Brock heard the cannonade and came running No, sorry,
Oh,
running, galloping.
riding,
Well,
yes.
he could have ran, but I'm not sure he would have made it in the time he did. Anyway, he reached the village of Queenston
Mhm.
early, probably at dawn. And the historical sequence about whether or not he went up to the Redan because the Americans had captured the hill, there's still debate about that. But
Yes.
needless to say, he gathered some men and again, as we have seen, led a charge to try and capture the Redan,
That's right.
the cannon.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It was because it was the Americans above
yeah,
the village
yeah.
that gave them a commanding position, and Brock, by that time, realized this was the main American invasion. So he had to deal with the main American invasion. It was not going to happen elsewhere.
Mhm.
Uh, and so he leads this desperate charge.
Mhm.
And we already described a very prominent man, very big man,
Yeah.
wearing this bright general's uniform.
Mhm.
You can't mistake him. And of course, one of the techniques in warfare at that time was to take out the officers if you can, and that's what happened. This American sharpshooter got him, and one shot, and that was it for Brock.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
So sad. So sad. Um, his funeral
Mm,
uh,
mm,
was attended
mm.
by 5,000 people, which is largely significant at the time because they would have to have come, from York and from other regions
Yeah, yes, yes,
to
uh,
Niagara on the
yes,
lake.
yeah.
Yeah.
On October 16th,
Day 13. Yeah.
nothing had been seen like that before in
Yeah.
Upper Canada,
Yeah.
an event like that.
Hmm.
Um, and it was an indication of, well, the affection, the respect
Hmm.
uh, for Brock, and the realization how much I mean, the people of Upper Canada and the Indigenous allies, how much they had lost with his death.
Well, I hate to end it there. Here we are at the edge of a cliff, you know. But this, I would say to our audience, is not the end of the story. There's more to the story. We're going to be exploring other aspects of Brock in future podcasts. Um, Wes, Dr. Turner, thank you for coming and walking through that with us because there's a lot of highlights in his life, and I'm glad you brought those out. So we say to everybody, thank you for joining us today. This is the Stories of 1812 podcast, and you've heard the story of Isaac Brock. There are other ones that we're going to be looking at. Our website is storiesofo1812.com. Want to thank Jim Valen of Valen Entertainment here in Niagara Falls for doing all the technical wizardry. And we will see you next time.